The words hit me like a slap across the face. My husband of 6 years, billionaire CEO Jackson Wallace, stood towering over me in our bedroom. His voice was cold as ice. "You are sleeping in the guest room until you apologize." I just nodded and quietly said, "Okay." He had no idea what was coming. That night, I emptied my side of our massive walk-in closet. The next morning, when he stormed into the guest room asking if I had learned my lesson, his face went pale. My closet was empty, divorce papers waited on the nightstand, and he finally understood who was really in charge. I met Jackson Wallace 7 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was 32, working as the director for a prestigious gallery in Manhattan, responsible for organizing the event. Jackson arrived fashionably late, commanding attention the moment he walked through the doors. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with piercing blue eyes and a confident smile that made everyone gravitate toward him. He donated $50,000 that night and bought a painting I had personally selected for the auction. When he approached me afterward, I assumed he wanted to discuss the artwork. Instead, he asked me to dinner. Our romance was a whirlwind. Private jets to Paris for weekend getaways, yacht excursions along the Mediterranean, and courtside seats at every major sporting event. It was intoxicating to be swept into his world of luxury and privilege. 6 months later, he proposed on a private beach in the Maldives with a 15-carat diamond ring that felt almost too heavy to wear. The wedding was featured in society magazines. 300 guests at his family estate in Connecticut, a 10-tier cake, and a designer gown that made me feel like royalty. My parents, middle-class teachers from Wisconsin, looked almost shell-shocked throughout the ceremony. My younger brother, Drew, kept whispering, "Are you sure about this?" But I was certain. Jackson was charming, successful, and seemed to adore me. What more could I want? The first year of our marriage felt like living in a dream. We moved into a stunning mansion outside of Greenwich, with 12 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and gardens that required a staff of 4 to maintain. I continued my work at the gallery, and Jackson seemed supportive of my career. He would send enormous flower arrangements to my office and take me to celebratory dinners whenever I closed an important sale. I thought I had it all: a successful career I loved, a handsome husband who seemed proud of me, and a lifestyle straight out of a fantasy. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that were there from the beginning. How he would suggest rather than ask. How his compliments always contained subtle critiques. "You look beautiful in that dress, but maybe next time something a bit more sophisticated for meeting the Henderson clients," or "That exhibition was impressive. If only you had included the Warhol collection, it would have been perfect." My wardrobe gradually transformed to meet his standards. Designer labels replaced my eclectic collection of vintage finds. My colorful dresses gave way to neutral tones and classic cuts. I didn't realize I was being molded into the perfect trophy wife until I barely recognized myself in the mirror. By our second anniversary, managing our home had become almost a full-time job in itself. There were constant dinner parties, charity galas, and business functions to host. My career began taking second place to the demands of being Mrs. Wallace. Jackson never explicitly asked me to cut back my hours at the gallery, but he would make comments about how tired I looked when trying to balance both, or point out minor household details that had been overlooked during my busy weeks. I hired more household staff and tried to juggle everything, determined to maintain both my career and my marriage. Jackson praised me when I successfully handled a difficult client of his or organized a flawless dinner party for his investors. His approval became something I craved, though I would never have admitted that to myself then. For our 5th anniversary, Jackson organized an extravagant party at our home. The guest list included politicians, celebrities, and the most influential names in the finance world. I spent weeks coordinating with event planners, florists, and caterers to ensure everything was perfect. That night, dressed in a gown Jackson had selected, I was speaking with the curator of the Whitney Museum about an upcoming exhibition featuring emerging artists. Jackson joined our conversation, his arm possessively around my waist. The Whitney is making a mistake focusing on these unknown artists, he said, cutting across my point. They should stick with established names that draw crowds and justify the ticket prices. I froze, feeling the curator's embarrassment. Jackson, I actually think the exhibition concept is brilliant, I said, trying to maintain my professional credibility. It positions the Whitney at the forefront of discovering new talent, which has always been part of their mission. Jackson laughed, the sound condescending. Darling, that's a charming perspective, but investment in unproven artists is rarely profitable. Trust me, I know how these institutions operate. Their boards care about numbers, not nurturing unknown talents. The curator quickly excused herself, and Jackson moved on to greet other guests as if nothing had happened. I stood there, humiliated and seething. He had completely undermined my expertise in my own field, dismissing years of my professional experience as naive. Later that night, after all the guests had left, I confronted him in our bedroom. You completely discredited me in front of a major museum curator, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Art is my profession, Jackson. You wouldn't appreciate me contradicting you about investment strategies in front of your clients. He loosened his tie and looked at me with genuine confusion. What are you talking about? I was helping you. That curator was feeding you a marketing line about emerging artists, and I was protecting you from buying into it. You should be thanking me. I stared at him, bewildered. That is absolutely not what happened. You talked over me and dismissed my professional opinion. Laura, you're overreacting, he said, his voice softening to that tone he used when he thought I was being irrational. I respect your work, you know that. But sometimes your emotions cloud your judgment in these business situations. I was looking out for you. I stood there, suddenly uncertain. Was I overreacting? Had he been trying to help? The confidence I'd felt just moments before began to crumble as Jackson continued explaining his version of the evening, one where he was the protective husband saving me from professional embarrassment. By the time he finished, I was apologizing to him. The realization makes me sick now, but at that moment, I truly believed I had misinterpreted his actions and was being ungrateful. That night marked a turning point. I finally glimpsed the subtle manipulation that had been happening for years, but it would take much more before I found the courage to do something about it. 6 months after our anniversary party, I received an exciting opportunity. The Smithsonian was assembling a team of specialists for authentication work on a newly discovered collection of 20th-century American paintings. They wanted me to lead the project, a career, defining opportunity that would establish me as one of the top authentication experts in the country. When I told Jackson over dinner, his first response wasn't congratulations. The timing is unfortunate, he said, swirling his wine glass. The Hendersons are hosting their annual retreat in Aspen during your second week of the project, and the governor will be attending. We need to be there. But this is incredibly important for my career, I explained. The Smithsonian specifically requested me. I can't reschedule. He set his glass down with controlled precision. Laura, the connections we could make at this retreat are invaluable. Surely the museum can adjust their timeline. They're not exactly operating on strict market deadlines. That night began a pattern that would repeat throughout the next few months. Whenever I had an important meeting or deadline for the Smithsonian project, Jackson would schedule something critical that required my presence. A dinner with potential investors. A charity gala where his company was being honored. A weekend with clients at our vacation home in the Hamptons. Each time, he made his expectations clear without ever explicitly forbidding me from prioritizing my work. Just subtle comments about appearances, commitment, and supporting each other's goals. His goals, I gradually realized, always took precedence. I began to notice other patterns in our relationship. Arguments that left me apologizing even when I'd done nothing wrong. How my perspective was often dismissed as emotional or naive. How many of my old friends had gradually disappeared from my life, deemed not sophisticated enough or a bad influence by Jackson. One evening, I left my phone on the kitchen counter while preparing dinner. It chimed with a text message, and Jackson, who was nearby reading financial reports, casually picked it up. "Who's Michael?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "He's the lead conservator on the Smithsonian project," I answered, continuing to chop vegetables. "We're discussing pigment analysis for the Porter painting." Jackson scrolled through my phone before setting it down. "Seems like you two text quite frequently." "Yes, about work," I said, a flicker of annoyance rising. "We have to coordinate our findings." He didn't respond, but the atmosphere in the kitchen had changed. Later that night, I noticed my phone was positioned differently than where I'd left it. Acting on intuition, I checked my settings and discovered the location sharing had been turned on. A cold realization settled in my stomach. Jackson was monitoring me. The next weekend, Jackson's college friend Taylor visited us. While Jackson took a business call, Taylor and I sat on the terrace overlooking the gardens. After some small talk, Taylor mentioned something that caught me off guard. "It's good to see Jackson happy," she said. "After what happened with Diane, we were all worried he'd never trust anyone again." "Diane?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I don't think he's ever mentioned a Diane to me." Taylor looked uncomfortable. "Oh, his girlfriend before you. They were together for nearly 4 years. I assumed you'd heard about her." I shook my head, curious now. "What happened between them?" She shifted in her seat. "Well, apparently she was too independent, always prioritizing her career, questioning his decisions. He felt undermined, I think. The breakup was pretty ugly. She even had to leave her job at the investment firm because his influence there made it impossible for her to continue." The conversation moved on, but Taylor's words echoed in my mind. Too independent, questioning his decisions. The parallels to my current situation were impossible to ignore. 2 weeks later, my best friend Amanda was in a car accident. She was rushed to the hospital with serious injuries, and I dropped everything to be there for her. It was the same evening Jackson had scheduled a dinner with potential investors from Saudi Arabia. "I need to go to the hospital," I told him, already grabbing my purse and car keys. "Laura, these investors have flown in specifically to meet us," Jackson said, his voice tense. "Can you at least make an appearance at dinner and then go to the hospital?" "She's in intensive care, Jackson. I'm sorry, but I have to be there." His expression hardened. "These dinner plans have been set for weeks. Your friend has other people who can be with her." For the first time in our marriage, I directly defied him. "No, I'm going to the hospital now. Amanda needs me." I spent the night in the hospital waiting room, alongside Amanda's family. The surgery was successful, but the recovery would be long. Throughout the evening, Jackson sent increasingly terse messages, asking when I would be home. When I finally returned the next morning, exhausted and emotionally drained, Jackson was waiting in his home office. "The dinner was a disaster," he said without preamble. "The Saudis took your absence as a sign of disrespect." "I told you it was an emergency," I responded, too tired to mince words. "My best friend nearly died." "And you couldn't spare 2 hours for the most important business dinner of the quarter?" His voice was controlled, but I could see the anger beneath. "Your priorities are becoming a serious problem, Laura." "My priorities?" I nearly laughed. "My priorities include being there for someone I love during a life or death situation." Jackson stood and walked to his desk. "Since you seem incapable of balancing your personal and professional obligations, I've taken steps to help you focus." "What are you talking about?" He turned his computer screen toward me. On it was our joint banking portal, showing that he had removed my access to all accounts except for a single household expense account with a modest balance. "Your spending has been excessive and irresponsible," he said calmly. "The gallery project is clearly taking a toll on your judgment." Until you've demonstrated more responsibility, I'll be managing our finances. I stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. Those are my accounts too. Actually, most are in my name, with you as an authorized user. A privilege I can revoke. That's my money too, I said, my voice rising. I contribute to this household, both financially and in managing everything. Do you? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Your gallery salary is a fraction of our household expenses. As for managing the household, the staff handles most of that. Your recent choices suggest you need guidance rather than independence. I was speechless. In one calculated move, he had stripped me of financial autonomy, using my loyalty to a friend as justification. It was then I finally recognized the truth I'd been avoiding for years. I was in an emotionally abusive relationship, carefully constructed to make me dependent on a man who needed to control every aspect of my life. As I turned to leave his office, Jackson called after me. The Hendersons are expecting us for dinner on Friday. I suggest you be there, Laura. Some damage control is necessary after your absence last night. I didn't respond. Something had broken inside me, but in its place, a new resolve was forming. This wasn't a marriage, it was a power game, and I was finally ready to play. After Jackson restricted my finances, I began making subtle moves toward independence. I opened a private bank account at a different bank, using my gallery address for all correspondence. Each time I received payment for authentication work, I deposited half into this secret account. The Smithsonian Project became my lifeline, not just professionally, but as a source of income Jackson couldn't monitor. I took on additional private consultation work, always requesting payment directly to my new account rather than through the gallery. 3 months into this quiet rebellion, I received a message from my brother Drew. He was getting married in the fall and wanted me to be part of the celebration. We hadn't been close in recent years, partly because Jackson found him too abrasive and opinionated. In truth, Drew saw through Jackson from the beginning, but had respected my choices enough to keep his distance. I met Drew for coffee in the city, away from Jackson's usual circles. The moment I saw him, emotions I had suppressed for years came flooding back. We hugged, and I realized how much I had missed my family while being absorbed into Jackson's world. You look different, Drew said after we sat down. I tried to smile. Good different or bad different? Just different. He studied me. More polished, I guess. But something in your eyes has changed. Over the next hour, I found myself telling Drew everything. The controlling behavior, the financial restrictions, the constant undermining. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. It was the first time I had verbalized the reality of my marriage to anyone. Drew listened without interrupting. When I finally fell silent, he reached across the table and took my hand. That's not love, Laura. That's control. Has he ever hurt you physically? No, I said quickly. It's not like that. Has never raised a hand to me. Emotional abuse is still abuse, Drew said firmly. And financial control is a form of abuse too. You know that, right? I looked away, uncomfortable with the term. It seemed too harsh, too definitive for what I had been enduring. But wasn't that exactly what I'd been experiencing? I think I need to make some changes, I admitted. I just don't know how to start. Drew squeezed my hand. Start by remembering who you are. The real Laura, not the version of yourself he wants you to be. I left that meeting feeling both terrified and strangely liberated. My brother was right. I had lost myself in becoming Mrs. Jackson Wallace. It was time to find Laura again. I began with small acts of reclamation. I redecorated the guest bedroom where I occasionally spent nights after disagreements with Jackson. I replaced the sterile gray and white design he preferred with colorful throw pillows and artwork I loved. When he commented on the changes, I simply said I thought the room needed refreshing. I started wearing clothes I'd kept hidden in the back of my closet, pieces with personality that didn't fit Jackson's approved aesthetic. I registered for an art history lecture series without consulting him first. When conflicts arose with his scheduled events, I sometimes chose my commitments over his. Each small decision to prioritize my own preferences felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity. Jackson noticed the changes, but seemed to interpret them as a phase, something he could wait out rather than a fundamental shift in our dynamic. The real test came with Drew's wedding. The celebration was planned for the same weekend as a business retreat Jackson had organized for his executive team and major shareholders. "We need to send our regrets to your brother," Jackson informed me one evening, not even looking up from his laptop. "The date conflicts with the Lake Tahoe strategic planning retreat. I'm not missing my only brother's wedding," I stated calmly. "You can send my regrets to the retreat." Jackson finally looked at me, genuine surprise crossing his features. "This retreat has been on the calendar for months, Laura. The entire board will be there, along with our top 20 clients. And Drew's wedding has been planned for over a year. I've already committed to helping with the rehearsal dinner and being part of the ceremony." Jackson's expression hardened. "This retreat is crucial for the company's 5-year growth strategy. As my wife, you're expected to be there." The old Laura would have capitulated, prioritizing Jackson's business interests over her own family, but I was no longer that woman. "I'm sorry that creates a challenge for you," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm attending my brother's wedding. You can join me if you'd like, or you can go to your retreat, but I'm going to be there for Drew." The argument escalated quickly. Jackson cycled through his usual tactics, dismissing the importance of the wedding, emphasizing the crucial business connections at the retreat, questioning my loyalty to him and his company. When none of that worked, he shifted to cold anger. "If you choose your brother's wedding over our company's future, you'll be sending a clear message about your priorities," he said, his voice frigid. "Yes, I will," I agreed. "Family matters to me. I would hope it matters to you, too." The night before we were scheduled to leave for the wedding, Jackson made his final play. He came into our bedroom while I was packing, his expression controlled but his eyes blazing. "I've made a decision," he announced. "If you're determined to attend this wedding rather than support me at the retreat, you can stay in the guest room until you're ready to apologize for this selfishness." I looked at my husband of 6 years. This man who had gradually isolated me from friends and family, controlled my finances, undermined my career, and was now attempting to prevent me from attending my own brother's wedding. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. "Okay," I said quietly, gathering my nightclothes. "I'll sleep in the guest room." Jackson seemed taken aback by my easy compliance, but quickly recovered. "Good. Perhaps some time to reflect will help you reconsider your choices." I moved to the guest room without further comment. Jackson left for his retreat the next morning without saying goodbye. I attended Drew's beautiful wedding, reconnected with family members I hadn't seen in years, and felt truly happy for the first time in longer than I could remember. When I returned to our house on Sunday evening, I decided to use the guest room again rather than returning to our shared bedroom. I needed space to think, to plan my next steps. While organizing some papers in the guest room desk, I discovered something unexpected. A false bottom in the top drawer revealed a hidden compartment containing financial documents I'd never seen before. Property deeds, offshore account statements, and investment portfolios, all carefully concealed from normal financial reviews. As I examined the documents more closely, my blood ran cold. Several luxury properties were listed in my name, purchased without my knowledge. Tax structures had been created using my identity to shield assets. There were even documents showing my signature that I'd never signed. This went beyond emotional control. Jackson had been using my identity for financial transactions without my consent or knowledge. The implications were staggering, potentially including fraud and tax evasion. That night, in the guest room Jackson had intended as my punishment, I made my decision. This wasn't just about escaping a controlling marriage anymore. It was about protecting myself from becoming an unwitting accomplice to financial crimes. I needed to get out, and I needed to do it intelligently. The woman who had once sought Jackson's approval was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight for her freedom, her future, and her dignity. The morning after discovering Jackson's hidden financial documents, I woke with a clarity I'd been missing for years. This wasn't a situation I could address with marriage counseling or heart-to-heart conversations. I needed a strategic exit plan. My first step was consulting a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone with experience handling high-net-worth divorces and financial complexity. After discreet research, I scheduled a consultation with Patricia Donovan, one of the top divorce attorneys in New York, known for her ruthless effectiveness in protecting clients from powerful spouses. I paid her consultation fee in cash from my secret account and met her in her Manhattan office during a day I was supposedly at the gallery. The moment I sat across from Patricia, her sharp eyes assessing me with clinical precision, I felt a strange sense of relief. Here was someone who couldn't be charmed or intimidated by Jackson. "I need to leave my husband, but the situation is complicated," I began. "They always are," she replied calmly. "Tell me everything, and don't sugarcoat. I need the ugly truth to help you effectively." Over the next 2 hours, I laid out the details of my marriage: the emotional manipulation, financial control, career sabotage, and finally, the hidden financial documents I'd discovered. Patricia took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly listening with focused attention. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked directly at me. "Based on what you've described, you're dealing with a sophisticated form of financial and emotional abuse. The unauthorized use of your identity for property purchases and tax structures is particularly concerning. It could expose you to legal liability." "What should I do?" I asked, my stomach knotting with anxiety. Patricia leaned forward. "First, we document everything. Every controlling behavior, every financial irregularity, every instance where your autonomy was compromised. Second, we secure copies of all financial records you can legally access. Third, we begin building your independence systematically and secretly." The plan Patricia outlined was methodical and comprehensive. I would need to gather evidence without alerting Jackson to my intentions. I would need to secure my own finances, establish independent credit, and create a support network separate from the social circles Jackson controlled. Most importantly, I would need to maintain the appearance of the dutiful wife while preparing for my departure. Any premature confrontation could prompt Jackson to hide assets or manufacture situations to undermine my credibility. Over the next 2 months, I became a covert operative in my own life. I photographed the hidden financial documents and returned them exactly as I'd found them. I recorded conversations where Jackson made controlling statements or financial threats. I maintained meticulous records of every instance where he monitored my activities or restricted my independence. I converted my art consultation fees to cash where possible, building a financial cushion that Jackson couldn't trace. I researched apartments in buildings where Jackson had no connections, eventually securing a lease under a limited liability company Patricia helped me establish. Most challenging was maintaining the facade of the compliant wife. I had to continue attending Jackson's corporate events, smiling through dinner parties with his associates, and pretending that nothing had changed. Each morning I would kiss him goodbye, then spend my day methodically preparing to leave him. The psychological toll was immense. There were moments of paralyzing doubt and fear. What if I couldn't succeed on my own? What if Jackson used his wealth and connections to destroy me professionally? What if I was overreacting to normal marital dynamics? During those moments, I would reread the notes from my conversations with Patricia. Sometimes I would call Drew, not telling him specific details, but drawing strength from his unwavering support. I had started seeing a therapist as well, ostensibly for work stress, but actually to help navigate the emotional complexity of my situation. A breakthrough came unexpectedly through Andrew Foster, Jackson's business partner and the company's chief financial officer. Andrew requested a private meeting with me, suggesting we meet at a small cafe in Connecticut, well away from Jackson's usual haunts. I was immediately suspicious. Was Andrew reporting my activities to Jackson? Had my careful planning been discovered? Nevertheless, I agreed to the meeting, preparing myself for potential confrontation. Andrew looked nervous when I arrived at the cafe, his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. He waited until our coffee had been served before speaking. "Laura, I need to talk to you about Jackson, and this conversation never happened," he began, his voice low. "There's an internal audit happening at the company, and some concerning patterns have emerged." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, careful to reveal nothing. Andrew glanced around before continuing. "Financial irregularities, questionable transactions, some involving properties and accounts that seem to be connected to you." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "I don't handle the company's finances, Andrew. I wouldn't know anything about that." "I think you might know more than you realize," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "Some of these transactions require spousal signatures, signatures that our auditors are questioning." In that moment, I made a calculated decision. Andrew could either be an ally or an obstacle, and I needed to determine which. "Are you suggesting my husband has been forging my signature on company documents?" I asked bluntly. Andrew flinched slightly, but didn't look away. "I'm suggesting that you might want to protect yourself." Soon, the implication was clear. Andrew wasn't just concerned about the company, he was warning me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He sighed deeply. "I've worked with Jackson for 15 years. He's brilliant, but he always believes he's untouchable. This time he's gone too far, and I don't want to see you caught in the fallout." As our conversation continued, Andrew revealed more details about the company's concerns, careful to present everything as hypothetical scenarios rather than direct accusations. He never explicitly said Jackson was committing fraud, but the message was unmistakable. Before we parted ways, Andrew slipped me a business card with a personal number written on the back. "If you ever need to discuss these hypothetical scenarios further," he said meaningfully. That meeting confirmed what I had suspected, but had been afraid to fully acknowledge. Jackson wasn't just controlling. He was potentially engaged in financial misconduct that could have serious legal consequences. My need to exit the marriage took on new urgency. A week later, while Jackson was at the office, I was organizing his closet as part of my dutiful wife performance when I discovered a hidden compartment similar to the one in the guest room desk. Inside was a small jewelry box containing a diamond bracelet I had never seen, along with a handwritten note signed Stephanie with a heart. Stephanie, Jackson's executive assistant, the woman who scheduled his countless late nights at the office and weekend business trips. The pieces suddenly fit together with sickening clarity. I took photographs of the bracelet and note, then conducted a deeper search of Jackson's private spaces. In his home office safe, which I had access to for household emergencies, I found receipts for hotel suites, restaurants, and jewelry stores, all for dates when Jackson had supposedly been at business conferences or meeting clients. I also discovered a lease agreement for a luxury apartment in Tribeca, paid for by one of the shell companies I'd seen in the hidden financial documents. The tenant was Stephanie Winters. The discovery of Jackson's affair should have devastated me. Instead, it provided the final confirmation I needed. Our marriage had been a facade for years, built on control, deception, and manipulation. Whatever love might have existed had long since been corrupted by Jackson's need to dominate every aspect of our relationship. That night, I contacted Patricia and updated her on my discoveries. The affair and the questionable financial activities strengthened my position significantly. It was time to move from preparation to action. As I continued playing the role of the perfect wife, I was no longer conflicted or afraid. Each smile, each acquiescence, Each dutiful performance was one step closer to freedom. Jackson, so confident in his control over me, never noticed that the woman he thought he had subjugated was silently dismantling the prison head built around her. With each passing week, my preparations for independence accelerated. The apartment I had leased was now furnished with basics, creating a simple but comfortable refuge for my new beginning. I had opened additional bank accounts, secured a separate credit card, and established a post office box for confidential mail. My most treasured possessions had been gradually moved to storage units or to the new apartment during times when Jackson was traveling. Patricia had prepared comprehensive divorce papers that addressed every aspect of our entangled lives. The document detailed the emotional abuse, financial control, identity theft, and infidelity, presenting a devastating case against Jackson. It also included provisions for equitable division of assets, including those that had been hidden from official financial disclosures. I had originally planned to wait another month before making my move, wanting every detail to be perfectly arranged. However, circumstances forced me to accelerate my timeline. Jackson announced he would be attending a weekend business retreat with his executive team, including Stephanie. The retreat was scheduled at a luxury resort in Scottsdale, providing me with the perfect opportunity to remove the last of my personal items from our house and prepare the guest room for my final night under Jackson's roof. What I didn't anticipate was Jackson returning early. I was in our bedroom, carefully selecting family heirlooms from my jewelry collection, when I heard the front door open. Panic surged through me as I recognized Jackson's footsteps in the foyer. It was Friday afternoon. He shouldn't have been home until Sunday evening. I quickly secured the jewelry in my handbag and tried to compose myself, but I wasn't fast enough. Jackson appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion as he observed me standing by my open jewelry safe. "You're home early," I said, fighting to keep my voice casual. "The first day of presentations finished ahead of schedule," he replied, his eyes moving from my face to the handbag where Id stashed the jewelry. "Planning to go somewhere?" "Just organizing things," I answered. "I thought while you were away, I'd sort through some items I don't wear anymore. Maybe donate them." Jackson stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "Donate Grandma Wallace's sapphires? Those have been in my family for 4 generations. My mind raced. How did he know exactly which pieces I'd selected? Had he inventoried my jewelry? "Of course not those," I said with a forced laugh. "Just some of the commercial pieces that don't have sentimental value." He extended his hand, his expression hardening. "Let me see what's in your bag, Laura." In that moment, I knew the carefully constructed plan I had been building was about to collapse. I could either continue the charade and potentially lose the advantage of the evidence I had gathered, or I could confront the truth and take control of the narrative. I chose the latter. "No, Jackson, I won't show you my bag. I won't continue pretending this is a normal request from a husband to his wife," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the control, the monitoring, the constant need to manage every aspect of my life," I stated clearly. "I'm talking about the financial decisions you've made using my identity without my consent. And I'm talking about your relationship with Stephanie." The color drained from his face. His momentary shock quickly transformed into cold anger. "You've been going through my things," he said, his tone accusatory. "Just as you've been going through mine for years," I countered. "The difference between us is that I found evidence of actual wrongdoing, not just independence you wanted to suppress." "What exactly do you think you found?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I know about the properties purchased in my name without my knowledge. I know about the offshore accounts structured to hide assets. I know about the apartment in Tribeca where you meet Stephanie. And I know about the diamond bracelet you bought her for your anniversary. Your anniversary with her, not with me." For the first time in our marriage, Jackson was speechless. The confident, controlling man who always had a response, who could twist any situation to his advantage, stood frozen in our bedroom, confronted with the truth of his deceptions. His silence confirmed everything. No denials, no explanations, no attempts to gaslight me into doubting what I'd discovered. Just the shocked realization that his carefully constructed world of control and deception had been exposed. When he finally spoke, his voice was unnervingly calm. "What do you want, Laura? Money? A more generous allowance? Your own credit cards again?" "I want a divorce," I stated simply. "I've already prepared the papers with my attorney. This marriage is over, Jackson." His laugh was cold and dismissive. "A divorce? Do you have any idea what you're saying? You signed a prenuptial agreement that would leave you with practically nothing." "I signed a prenuptial agreement that becomes invalid in cases of infidelity or fraudulent financial activity," I corrected him, "both of which I can now prove." His expression shifted, calculation replacing shock. "The legal proceedings would take years," he said, his confidence returning. "Years of your life consumed by court appearances and depositions. Years during which your professional reputation would be tied to scandal. Is that really what you want?" "If necessary, yes," I replied. "But I think once your board of directors and major shareholders understand the nature of the financial irregularities involving my identity, they'll encourage you to settle quickly and quietly." It was a direct hit. Jackson valued his business reputation above everything. The suggestion that his professional image might be tarnished struck at his most vulnerable point. "You're threatening me," he said incredulously. "I'm stating facts. There's a difference." We stood in silence, the power dynamic between us fundamentally altered. For the first time in our relationship, Jackson wasn't in control of the narrative or the outcome. The realization seemed to physically affect him, his posture changing as the implications became clear. "This isn't over," he finally said, turning to leave the room. "You're right about that," I agreed. "It's just beginning." After he left, I called Patricia immediately, updating her on the confrontation and the accelerated timeline. She advised me to proceed with caution, but not to leave the house unless I felt physically threatened. Abandoning the marital home could complicate the legal proceedings. That night, I moved my remaining essentials to the guest room and locked the door. Sleep was impossible as I listened to Jackson pacing in his office, occasionally hearing the sound of items being thrown or furniture being moved. The controlled facade had cracked, revealing the volatile man beneath. In the morning, I woke early and prepared the guest room exactly as planned. I placed the divorce papers on the nightstand, clearly visible beside a small framed photo of me at a gallery opening from before our marriage. The woman in that photo was smiling with genuine joy and professional pride, a stark contrast to the carefully composed expressions I'd learned to wear as Mrs. Wallace. At precisely 7:30, Jackson knocked on the guest room door. I opened it to find him impeccably dressed in a business suit, his expression controlled once again. "Have you learned your lesson?" he asked, his tone suggesting he expected a contrite apology for my behavior the previous evening. I stepped aside, allowing him to see into the room. My side of the closet was empty, the divorce papers waiting on the nightstand. "Yes, I have," I answered calmly. "I've learned that I deserve better than this marriage." Jackson stared at the divorce papers, then at the empty closet, his composure finally shattering completely. The man who had systematically controlled every aspect of our lives for years was suddenly confronted with the one thing he couldn't manage, my decision to leave. In that moment, as I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, Jackson finally understood who was really in charge. It wasn't him anymore. It was me. The days following my confrontation with Jackson unfolded like a psychological chess match. His initial shock quickly gave way to a series of calculated tactics designed to regain control of the situation and, by extension, me. First came rage. After seeing the divorce papers, Jackson stormed through the house, his carefully maintained public persona completely abandoned. He shouted accusations of betrayal and ingratitude, reminding me of everything had given me and how it'd be nothing without him. I remained in the guest room with the door locked, listening to his tirade but refusing to engage. When fury failed to draw me out, he shifted to intimidation. That afternoon, I received an email from him detailing the financial devastation I would face if I pursued the divorce. According to his assessment, I would lose access to our homes, our social standing, and any meaningful income. The message was clear. Without him, I would be destitute and alone. I forwarded the email directly to Patricia, who responded within hours. His threats are textbook intimidation tactics and further evidence of financial abuse. Each one strengthens our case. Stay strong and continue documenting everything. By evening, Jackson had moved to his next strategy: strategic generosity. He left an envelope containing a credit card with a $50,000 limit outside the guest room door, along with a handwritten note suggesting we take time to reconsider such a drastic decision. Perhaps a vacation would help clear my head? I photographed both items and left them untouched. Over the next 3 days, Jackson cycled through these tactics with increasing desperation. When none succeeded in changing my position, he finally resorted to the approach I had anticipated from the beginning: romantic manipulation. I returned from a meeting with Patricia to find the house filled with my favorite flowers. A gourmet dinner had been prepared and was waiting, along with an expensive bottle of the champagne we'd had at our wedding. Jackson had changed into the suit he wore on our first date and had cued the song from our first dance. "Laura," he said when I entered, his voice soft and his expression contrite, "I know I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes that hurt you deeply. But 6 years of marriage deserves more than a cold legal document. It deserves a conversation, a chance to remember what brought us together in the first place." The performance was flawless. The old Laura might have been swayed by this romantic gesture, might have interpreted it as evidence that the man she fell in love with was still there beneath the controlling behavior. But I could now recognize the manipulation behind the grand gesture. "Thank you for dinner, Jackson," I said politely but firmly, "but am not interested in renegotiating the terms of my freedom." His expression hardened momentarily before he regained control. "This isn't about negotiation. It's about us, about rebuilding what we've lost." "We haven't lost anything, Jackson," I replied. "You've systematically destroyed it with years of control, manipulation, and deception. The flowers and champagne don't change that reality." I turned to leave, but his next words stopped me. "What if I got help?" he asked, an edge of genuine desperation in his voice. "Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I can change, Laura." For a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of the old connection, the hope that had sustained me through years of gradual oppression. But the evidence of his financial deception and affair with Stephanie quickly extinguished that flicker of sentiment. "The time for that was years ago," I said gently. "Before the hidden properties, before Stephanie, before you turned our marriage into a power game rather than a partnership." I returned to the guest room, leaving him with the elaborate romantic setup that had failed to achieve its purpose. The situation escalated beyond our household when our social circle inevitably became aware of the separation. Jackson moved quickly to control the narrative, suggesting to our mutual friends that I was experiencing some kind of breakdown brought on by work stress. According to his version, he was the concerned husband trying to support his troubled wife through a difficult period. Some of our acquaintances accepted this explanation without question, their texts and calls to me full of well-meaning but condescending concern. Others, particularly women who had perhaps seen glimpses of Jackson's controlling behavior over the years, reached out with more nuanced support. The most surprising response came from Meredith Huntington, the wife of Jackson's largest investor and a formidable social presence in her own right. She invited me to lunch at a discreet restaurant in the city, away from our usual social haunts. "Laura," she began after we had ordered. "Let's dispense with the polite fiction that this is a casual catch-up. I know you've initiated divorce proceedings against Jackson, and I want you to know that I understand completely." Her directness caught me off guard. "You do?" Meredith nodded, her expression serious. "My first husband was cut from the same cloth as Jackson. Charming in public, controlling in private, convinced of his right to manage every aspect of my existence. I had known Meredith for years, but had never heard her mention a previous marriage. She had always been Elliot Huntington's wife, the perfect corporate spouse. "What happened?" I asked, genuinely curious. She smiled, a fierce expression that transformed her usually composed features. "I left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and rebuilt my life on my terms. Then I met Elliot, who wanted a partner, not a possession. By the end of our lunch, Meredith had provided me with contacts for additional legal support and had offered to counter any narrative Jackson might spread through their social circle. "You'll find more allies than you expect," she assured me. "Women who have been watching and recognizing the signs because they've lived some version of your experience." She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, as news of our separation spread, I received messages of support from women I'd known peripherally through Jackson's business functions. Some shared their own stories of controlling relationships. Others simply offered practical assistance or professional connections to help me reestablish my independent career. Jackson, meanwhile, had shifted his strategy once again. When private manipulation failed, he took the conflict into the public sphere. He began suggesting to business associates that my art authentication work had been compromised by poor judgment, potentially affecting the valuation of pieces I'd certified. It was a calculated attack on my professional credibility. Patricia advised me to respond not with defensive statements but with excellence. I threw myself into completing the Smithsonian project, ensuring that my authentication work was impeccable and thoroughly documented. Rather than address Jackson's rumors directly, I let the quality of my work speak for itself. The turning point came unexpectedly at the annual charity gala for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the very event where Jackson and I had met 7 years earlier. Though we were separated, both of us had committed to attending months before, and neither was willing to cede the important networking opportunity to the other. The organizers, aware of our situation, had seated us at different tables. I was placed with Andrew Foster and his wife, along with several museum board members. Jackson was across the room with major donors, including Elliot Huntington. Throughout the evening, I could feel Jackson's gaze following me as I engaged comfortably with the art world professionals at my table. I wore a vibrant red gown that I had purchased myself, a dramatic departure from the subdued, Jackson-approved styles that had filled my closet for years. During the dinner, Andrew Foster rose to give a brief speech about the company's ongoing support for the museum. It was a standard corporate presentation until Andrew deviated from his usual script. "The Wallace Group has always recognized the value of integrity in all our endeavors," he stated, looking pointedly at Jackson. "In business, in philanthropic partnerships, and in personal relationships. As we move forward, the board remains committed to the highest ethical standards and thorough transparency in all our operations." The message beneath the corporate language was clear to anyone aware of the situation. Andrew was publicly signaling that the company board was aware of potential improprieties and was distancing itself from Jackson's personal conduct. Jackson's face darkened as Andrew continued, emphasizing the upcoming internal review of all company operations. By the time Andrew concluded his remarks, several investors at Jackson's table were engaged in urgent, whispered conversations. I later learned that during the remainder of the gala, Elliot Huntington had directly questioned Jackson about financial irregularities that Meredith had brought to his attention. Other investors, already nervous about Andrew's unusual speech, began pressing for more detailed information about company operations. By Monday morning, the Wallace Group's stock had dropped 11 points amid rumors of potential leadership issues. The board called an emergency meeting and Jackson was suddenly fighting for his corporate survival rather than focusing on controlling me. Patricia called with the news before I had even finished my morning coffee. The board has placed Jackson on administrative leave pending a full financial review, she reported. Suddenly, your divorce is the least of his problems. For the first time since Id confronted Jackson with my discovery of his deception, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was facing consequences that his wealth and charm couldn't easily overcome. It wasn't vindication I felt, or even satisfaction. It was something quieter and more profound. The realization that the systems of power and privilege that had protected Jackson were not infallible. That truth, persistently pursued, could penetrate even the most carefully constructed facade. That evening, alone in my new apartment surrounded by the few cherished possessions Id brought from my former life, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness or regret, but from relief and a growing sense of possibility. The hardest steps were behind me. The road ahead, while uncertain, was finally my own to navigate. The divorce proceedings lasted 11 months, each week bringing new challenges and small victories. Jackson fought the process every step of the way, employing delaying tactics and attempting to hide assets despite the growing corporate scrutiny he faced. His once imposing power had been significantly diminished by the board's ongoing investigation, but he still commanded substantial resources and influence. Patricia proved invaluable throughout the process, anticipating Jackson's maneuvers and countering them with strategic precision. She was unfazed by the array of high-priced attorneys he cycled through, meeting each new legal team with the same methodical dismantling of their arguments. The critical breakthrough came when a junior accountant at the Wallace Group, emboldened by the changing company culture under Andrew's temporary leadership, provided documentation of financial transactions that corroborated my claims about misused signatures and hidden assets. This evidence, combined with the detailed records I had gathered during my months of preparation, created an insurmountable case. Jackson finally agreed to settlement negotiations when the board made it clear that his return to leadership would depend on resolving all personal legal issues, including the divorce. His attempt to paint me as emotionally unstable had backfired, and now his professional future hinged on reaching an agreement that would end public scrutiny of our marriage. The settlement meetings were tense, with Jackson vacillating between cold fury and calculated charm. Patricia advised me to maintain minimal direct interaction with him, allowing the attorneys to handle all communications. When we did speak, I kept my responses brief and factual, refusing to be drawn into emotional exchanges that he might use to portray me as irrational. While the divorce proceedings unfolded, I focused on rebuilding my professional life. The Smithsonian project had been completed successfully, earning praise from the institution's directors and leading to referrals for additional authentication work. I established Laura Barrett Authentication Services, reclaiming my maiden name professionally even before the divorce was finalized. The business grew rapidly, my reputation for meticulous research and ethical standards attracting clients who valued integrity over expediency. I hired 2 associate specialists and leased a small but elegant office space in Chelsea, creating a professional environment that reflected my personal aesthetic rather than Jackson's corporate preferences. My personal life underwent equally significant transformation. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away during my marriage, their genuine happiness at my renewed independence, healing some of the isolation Id experienced. My relationship with Drew and his new wife flourished, our Sunday dinners becoming a cherished ritual that anchored each week. The most unexpected relationship to emerge from this period was my friendship with Andrew Foster. After his actions at the gala effectively ended Jackson's control over the Wallace Group, Andrew had reached out to apologize for not intervening earlier. Over coffee, we discovered a shared interest in modernist architecture that led to regular conversations entirely separate from the ongoing legal proceedings. Andrew's perspective, as someone who had worked closely with Jackson for years, helped me process my experiences without self-recrimination. He could identify the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had gradually eroded my independence, confirming that many intelligent, capable people had similarly been controlled by Jackson's carefully calibrated approach to power. 10 months into the divorce proceedings, with the settlement negotiations finally progressing, I received a text from Jackson asking to meet at our former home to discuss the division of personal items not covered in the formal agreement. Patricia advised against meeting him alone, but I decided this was a conversation I needed to have, a final step in reclaiming my narrative. I arrived at the Greenwich mansion on a crisp autumn afternoon, the gardens beginning their seasonal transformation. The house seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than the palace it had once represented in my mind. Jackson opened the door himself, the household staff having been reduced during the financial restructuring forced by the board's investigation. He looked different, the confident corporate titan replaced by someone more uncertain, slightly diminished. His attempt at his old controlling smile felt hollow, a performance without the power that had once made it effective. We walked through the house, discussing which items held personal significance for each of us. The process was surprisingly civil until we reached the library, where so many of our most difficult conversations had taken place. Jackson paused, his expression shifting to one I recognized from the early days of our marriage, a calculated vulnerability designed to evoke sympathy and connection. "It didn't have to end this way, Laura," he said softly. "We could have worked through our problems if you'd been willing to compromise." I recognized the tactic immediately. Even now, facing the dissolution of our marriage and his company, Jackson was attempting to reframe the narrative, to place the responsibility for our failed relationship on my unwillingness to accommodate his control. "Our problems weren't a matter of compromise, Jackson," I replied calmly. "They were about control, deception, and fundamental disrespect. No amount of compromise would have created a healthy marriage from that foundation." He moved closer, his voice taking on the intimate tone that had once made me feel chosen and special. "We had something rare, something most people never experience. The passion, the connection, the life we built together. Are you really ready to throw that away over some misunderstandings and mistakes?" For a brief moment, I glimpsed the alternate reality his words offered. A world where our marriage had been a love story temporarily derailed rather than a systematic exercise in control and manipulation. It was a seductive revision of history, one that would absolve both of us of deeper responsibility. But the evidence was too substantial to ignore, the pattern too consistent to reinterpret as isolated mistakes. The financial deception, the affair with Stephanie, the years of subtle undermining and isolation, these were not misunderstandings, but deliberate choices that revealed the true nature of Jackson's feelings toward me. "What we had wasn't love," I said finally. "It was ownership disguised as care, protection that was actually control, support that came with the price of compliance. I've learned the difference now, and I won't confuse the two again." Jackson's expression hardened, the mask of contrition falling away. He took a step back, regarding me with something between anger and grudging respect. "You've changed," he said, almost accusatory. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his observation. "Yes, I have. Or, more accurately, I've remembered who I was before I started changing to meet your expectations." We finished our inventory of the house in silence, the pretense of reconciliation abandoned. When we reached the front door, Jackson made one final attempt to assert control over our narrative. "You'll regret this decision, Laura," he said, his tone somewhere between a prediction and a threat. "No one will ever provide for you the way I did. No one will ever understand you like I do." I looked at the man I had once believed held all the power in our relationship, the man whose approval I had desperately sought for years. In that moment, I felt neither anger nor fear, but a profound pity for someone who could only relate to others through domination rather than genuine connection. "I'm not looking for someone to provide for me, Jackson," I replied. in providing for myself now. And as for understanding me, you never really tried. You were too busy trying to remake me into who you wanted me to be. I left the mansion without looking back, driving away from the 6 years of my life that had gradually transformed from a fairy tale into a cautionary tale about the difference between love and control. 1 month later, the divorce was finalized. The settlement granted me a fair portion of our marital assets, ownership of the intellectual property associated with my authentication business, and complete separation from any Wallace Group enterprises that might have exposed me to financial liability. Jackson resigned from his position as CEO the same week, the board investigation having uncovered sufficient evidence of financial impropriety to make his continued leadership untenable. Andrew was appointed interim CEO while the company underwent comprehensive restructuring. Today, 3 years after walking out of that mansion for the final time, my life bears little resemblance to my days as Mrs. Jackson Wallace. My authentication business has expanded to include offices in New York and Chicago. I teach graduate seminars at NYU on authentication methodology. My relationship with my family has deepened beyond what I could have imagined during the isolated years of my marriage. I recently purchased a brownstone in Brooklyn, my first independent real estate decision, decorated entirely according to my eclectic personal taste. The walls feature artwork by emerging artists whose careers I support through a small foundation established with a portion of my divorce settlement. My personal life has evolved as well. After 2 years of intentional independence, I began cautiously dating again, now equipped with a clear understanding of the warning signs of controlling behavior. I've formed a relationship with someone who celebrates my success rather than feeling threatened by it, who views compromise as mutual adjustment rather than one-sided accommodation. The most profound change, however, is internal. I no longer seek external validation for my choices or question my own perceptions when they conflict with someone else's narrative. I recognize manipulation tactics that once would have swayed me, and I trust my ability to establish and maintain healthy boundaries. The journey from the woman who nodded and said okay to sleeping in the guest room to the woman who placed divorce papers on the nightstand was not simply about leaving a controlling husband. It was about reclaiming my identity, my agency, and my ability to distinguish between love and control. For anyone living in the shadow of someone else's expectations, questioning your own worth and perceptions, I hope my story offers both recognition and possibility. The path to freedom is rarely straightforward, often requiring strategic patience and careful planning. But beyond the fear and uncertainty lies the profound peace of living authentically, answering only to your own values rather than someone else's demands. Have you ever found yourself gradually compromising your identity to please someone else? What was your breaking point that finally helped you see the situation clearly? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about reclaiming personal power. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve more than control, disguised as love. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to recognize your own worth and the strength to stand firmly in it.